Could the Mona Lisa be black? By this, I mean, could one of our key cultural signifiers in this world be a portrait of a black woman? I want to drill down into just how much art history cements our ideas of beauty, propagates stereotypes, and is deeply rooted in the politics of being seen. The Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci is one of the most iconic and most seen images in the world. Here are some other images that typify beauty in art. We have the Rockaby Venus by Velázquez and the Birth of Venus by Botticelli. These images are so embedded in the visual culture that they impact on so much more than just art history. In 2019, a woman called Darian Simone Harvin posted a Twitter thread. And in that Twitter thread, she asked Black women to stand in front of the Mona Lisa confidently. When I saw this, it confirmed something for me. It made me realize that being seen is fundamental. When I was a child, I was hyper aware of the gaze. I would stare forever, and I know children are very much scolded for staring, but so I must have found some sort of solace and some place where I wanted to look without interruption. Luckily, in museums, you are applauded for staring. You're encouraged. It's the entire thing. And so I would stand and or sit on one of those hard museum benches and stare at many of these portraits. And I would look, and my parents would be very confused, and they would refer to what they call my searching eyes, because I was indeed searching for something. I was searching for some sort of relatability, some access point, some key to unlock something. And most importantly, I was looking for somebody that looked like me. Now I look for a living. As a curator and art historian, I look to the future, I look back into history, I look around the world, and I look to find stories that haven't been told and new ways of telling them to more people. And what I realized is that looking can unlock so much. So many of my foremost experiences with art have allowed me to discover myself. In looking back into history and into art history, I've been able to discover what it has been to be Black, what it has been to be a woman, what it has been to be human, and allow those experiences to unpack how I move around the world. Art can do this for everybody. However, in my particular case, it wasn't that like there was this huge expanse of art history about Black womanhood that I could readily access. So I had to look into the foreground of images, and I had to look into between the chapters and in between the lines to understand and find different stories that were relatable to me. Isn't it interesting that I can find out much more about gardens in 17th and 18th century painting than I can look into the history of the Black woman in art? That I can discover much more about particular flowers in still life Flemish painting than I can find the names, the stories, and the histories of the Black women that sat for European painters like Manet. Thinking of Manet, for example, we have Manet's Olympia here. Only recently were we able to find out who the woman in the background was. Her name is Laure, and until now, she was only called La Negresse, which means black woman. Could the Mona Lisa have been black, or any other race for that matter? There are many different images throughout art history that prove that is a huge expanse of black women in art. For example, we don't have known so little about Jean Duval, who was Baudelaire's mistress, but also a Haitian-born actress and dancer. Until now, we've only known what Baudelaire has spoken of her, but we've only known what painters such as Manet have depicted her as. And so she's been trapped, like many women, by limited imaginations. This painting is very much known as the African Mona Lisa. It's by an artist, an African modernist, by Ben Onwumwu. And in looking at images like this, I wondered what the world would be like if our cultural markers, our sort of hallmarks of art history, explained and expanded and reflected on humanity as a whole, if they reflected the many different cultures that the world contains within it. In art history, we have something called the canon. And the canon is this very convenient, neatly packaged set of ideas, narratives, stories that allow us to typify movements and eras and genres. But unfortunately, the canon has been historically exclusionary. And so we must look at what we've been told and what stories we've been sold in order to unpack these different ideas and look at the true expanse of art history. And we can use that framework to expand this way of thinking into how we look at visual culture, how we look at pop culture, and so how we look at the world around us. So much has happened since Sojourner Truth, who was a former slave and an abolitionist, bared her breasts in front of an anti slavery rally to a white population. When she did this because men were shouting, "I don't believe you are a woman." So she had something to prove. Later, white women would then rally so that Truth could not speak at women's conventions, rallying for women's rights. And so we see another canon. We see a canon of othering Black women. Black women are hypervisible, yet they've been tightly controlled by very limited stereotypes. Fragile fear, fascination. Art history has gaslighted us into understanding or thinking that Black women are either not beautiful or not worthy of representation, or that they just didn't exist, which obviously could not have been true. And so, whenever we do see them, we see them within a classical framework that has historically excluded or created a narrative about Black women or about Blackness as propaganda. When I was a young girl, my mother told me a story. The story was about the Hottentot Venus. And this story was about a South African Khoi woman who was called Sarah Bartman. Between the years of 1810 to 1814, she was toured around Europe as a freak show attraction. And so she would cause horror and intrigue from London to France as audiences would gawp at her voluptuous body. She was the subject, or the object rather, of scientific fascination and bewilderment. This story this story impacted on me so much more than I could ever have thought. We can see how the legacy can live on. Here on the right, we see an image of Kim Kardashian on the cover of Paper magazine, and we also see the Hottentot Venus. This juxtaposition came across on social media and on a Time magazine article by Jordan Blaze when the cover was released. And it was an interesting sort of proving point about how we can look into the historical past in order to understand the contemporary present. Could the BBL or the Brazilian butt lift have existed, or could the bootylicious era have existed without the Hottentot Venus's presence lingering in our minds? Destiny's Child sang, "I don't think you're ready for this jelly," and truly history it really hasn't been. And then we have respectability politics. And respectability politics have denied women agency over how they display their own bodies, how they display their sexuality. American writer and poet Audre Lorde advocated for the power of agency over your own sexuality and your identity. Who controls the image is important. When I was younger, I was brought up in the noughties, I was brought up in the 2000s. I was fascinated by music videos. I was very intrigued by the sort of ostentatious displays of new money and wealth and sexuality. But in particular, I was interested in the women in the background. And if you were watching music videos at that time, you would have seen a lot of women in the back shaking their ass. And so I was fascinated as to who they were. They were always nameless. We didn't know who they were. They were just almost like backdrops. But now we see a new era of music stars. We see people like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion and the City Girls who are boldly reclaiming their own sexuality on their own terms. And they are using this to become one woman extravaganzas rather than backdrops for rappers. And so I ask, what if the Mona Lisa were Black? Because I know that what we see in the world impacts on how we understand certain communities. We only have to look to the Black fashion model to understand this. The Black fashion model was once a scarcity represented by only a few people, and now has expanded. Once scarce, now prolific. You'll be hard pressed not to see a cover with a Black Black women on the front, or an international campaign, or catwalk, or anything really. And so we can see that although we cannot go back into time, we can amend history in real time by uplifting women and different artists and voices in our contemporary world. This is a artwork called Not Manet's Type, and it's by Carrie Mae Weems. And this artwork is important. It's a series of self-portraits that's juxtaposed by commentary. And the commentary expands on the objectification and the absence of the Black female model in modern art. This image is important to me because it also, at its core, represents and at its essence, a unrequited love affair with art history. As a curator and an art historian, I seek to reframe, reposition, and insert. So this year, actually just a few weeks ago, I curated an exhibition called Black Venus. And in this exhibition, which Weems's work is also a part of, I approached and represented Black women and Black non-binary photographers who were taking images of Black women in order to reclaim their bodies, to reclaim their agency, and to combat these narrow stereotypes. The exhibition was at Photographiska in New York and featured up to 20 different artists throughout many different eras, showing the full non-monolithic expanse of Black womanhood and addressing all different aspects of what Black womanhood could be had they not been limited by history. Historical photographs reflect Western culture's fascination with Black women's bodies, reinforcing beliefs about racial differences and hierarchies. In the 19th century, Black women were rarely posing for artistic studies, but more rather, they were objects of social and social scientific fascination, or they were exotic representatives of fetishized faraway lands. Some of the portraits in the exhibition had artists repose or restage different photographs and different artist works. And in doing so, they were boldly reclaiming this narrative. They were also negotiating the idea of the gaze. And so in many of the works, you would see them staring. And they were almost as if they were saying, look at us now. We have always been here. See us. What would the world have been like if the Mona Lisa were Black? What we see is political. It is the fundamental reason why art has the power to change the world. Who is depicted as beautiful or powerful or important has always been a great signifier of who gets remembered in history. We've always known this. That's why great leaders commission those mad, grand portraits of them as big as beasts taming mighty horses. It's great propaganda. We're living in a time when the whole expanse of history is opening up before our very eyes. If art is the emotional memory of the world, then art, history, humanity, and Black women have always been more than what we've been told. Thank you.